Well, okay, welcome you all. Welcome to Tatanka's Living Room with Danny Sheehan.
Hey, guys.
And I just let you know, we're thinking about ways of using this technology for more than just a one way from Danny, but that is really what we need right now. And those of you who do choose to become a contributor to this amazing cause, without which I believe, Carol and I have a lot of causes, but without this one, we will have much less of a fighting chance of a future for the next 7 generations. It's so critical what they're doing. We are grateful actually from this message from Mother Nature, from this little virus, to have us pause and breathe and recognize the threat to our lungs, which reminds us of the threat to the lungs of Mother Earth, so that we have a time to reset everything, to reset our ideologies, to reset our economics, to reset our politics, to reset our education. And there's no one better to really do this than Danny. We are grateful to the leadership of the Romero Institute at this time. So we welcome all our guides in this meeting. We know we're not alone, and that spirit of the future calling to us comes through the voice of Danny Sheehan.
Great. Thank you, you guys. The thing that I wanted to start out with here tonight is this extraordinarily strange period that we're in, where we have divided our country into basically the people who watch Fox News and the people who watch CNN and MSNBC. And those of us who generally watch MSNBC and CNN and read the New York Times and Washington Post, we just are shocked and stunned at how completely foolish and stupid and dumb people can be to possibly believe the things that Trump and Fox News are saying. But then they look at the Fox News and they watch us, and what they're saying is they're completely shocked at how gullible we can be, because they're absolutely convinced that we're all being conned into believing that there's this really horrible thing going on right now. And so what I did is I sort of confronted them, and I said, look, what in the world do you believe could possibly be going on that's going to cause the entire established order on the planet, basically, all the way from the UN to all governments to law enforcement agencies and virtually all the national media, to be pretending that something so much worse than we've ever seen before is actually happening? What is their reason for it? And what they did is they rolled out this report that I had never heard of, a 2010 report of the Rockefeller Foundation, and it's called Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. And it's they laid out these alternative scenarios that could be taking place in the future. And one of these scenarios, the very first one that they listed as the sort of alternative way that the future could go, is what they call Operation Lockstep. And it turns out this is real, this is true, that there is this Rockefeller Foundation report, which you can find, and it goes through this entire scenario, pursuant to which there is declared a pandemic is declared by the central governments of the world, and then they go down and they actually quote whole sections of this, have actually put them up on the internet. And Marilyn Madden sent a copy of this to me and has highlighted whole sections of this where it's I can tell you, it's really chilling how parallel all of this is to what's happening right now, about how people are all ordered to wear masks. And then there's all kinds of evidence showing that the masks don't really do anything to really protect you. but they're using it as an example of getting people to get into lockstep with everyone. They anyway. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a look at this thing for the first time, because not that I tend to ever believe anything the Fox News talks about. But the fact of the matter is there's an awful lot of the people from the 9/11 Truth movement that are starting to take a look at this thing, and that they're suspicious, and so that there's this major conspiracy theory that is operational right now, that is going to require some more attention for me to take a look at, because there are some disquieting statistics that are arising now, and yet everybody still remains shut down. All the economics are shut down, et cetera. And so that the people who are promulgating this hoax theory have gone to this report of the Rockefeller Foundation, this 2010 report called Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. So I'm just suggesting that you take a look at those things, not because I want you to be convinced by them, but I want you to be able to start arming yourself to figure out how to respond to those kind of assertions. I'm suspicious that what really was done is that the original scenario that was set forth in this report, the so-called Operation Lockstep, has really been put forth by the foundation as what could possibly happen. You know, how there might be an abuse of authority to try to take advantage of a particular minor epidemic of some kind to roll into place this central government. Now, so I'm just encouraging you all to take a look at that thing. And so I'm puzzled here enough to bring it to your attention to try to rally a bunch of us that are, intelligent analysts of what's going on in the world to take a look at that. Okay, so that's the first item that I wanted to talk about. The second item that I wanted to talk about is the ongoing. It's absolutely clear that, to me, that MSNBC and CNN are on a major campaign to unseat Donald Trump. Now, we may all agree with that. I mean, I personally am happy to see anybody trying to unseat him, but it doesn't change the fact that when you turn on either CNN or NBC, that they're just lathering to connect every bad thing that's happening with the pandemic, everything bad thing that's happening in the economy, to lay it onto Trump, and that they're basically rolling out Democrats to take up the same theme. How responsible Trump is for what's happened here, how he's got blood on his hands, he's responsible for all these deaths. Don't you think we all ought to get rid of him? Don't you think we also ought to get rid of the Republican leadership in the Senate so that we can get control of the House and Senate and get Joe Biden in to be president? And I just look at that and I just say to myself, just because I happen to agree with them doesn't mean that I don't recognize that that type of reporting is in a sense almost as skewed as Fox News is, just in the other direction. Now, Fox News people are flat out lying constantly, but that they're engaged in this ideological campaign, a propaganda campaign on behalf of Trump and Trump's bizarre mix of ideologies. And MSNBC and CNN now are basically engaged in an ideological campaign to get Trump out of there and to get Joe Biden in. And they were both CNN and MSNBC, in my opinion, were supporting Joe Biden from the very beginning. Because the DNC was supporting Joe Biden, and they were opposed to Bernie Sanders at all costs. and they were not supportive at all of Elizabeth Warren. It was perfectly clear to who it is they were supporting. And they're now trying to push back against except for Rachel Maddow, are trying to push back against Elizabeth Warren potentially being Joe Biden's vice presidential running mate. That both CNN and MSNBC are basically in favor of Kamala Harris being the vice president, because she's in a lot of ways more conservative as a hard-nosed criminal prosecutor that she's been in her past, an attorney general. That she's kind of a tough character, and nowhere near as progressive as Elizabeth Warren. So that I think, given how the political vicissitudes have evolved to this point, where it's perfectly obvious that Joe Biden is going to be the nominee for the Democratic Party, the best thing that most of us can possibly hope for here is that there would be enough pressure put on Joe Biden by the threat of Trump possibly winning, that he would be smart enough to go to selecting Elizabeth Warren as his vice president. That would give the progressive community a position in Washington, inside the staff of Elizabeth Warren, to solidify, to keep constantly developing a progressive agenda, to be constantly putting it in front of Joe Biden to try to persuade him to do the right thing, and the same way in Congress, in both houses. Because I believe that if, in fact, Joe Biden were to select Elizabeth Warren for his vice presidential running mate, that they would win. I think that the progressive community would be much more mobilized to get into working for the Democratic ticket. And I think that they would have the best chance if they could mobilize the young people, the people from basically 33 on down to 18, if they could be mobilized to come out to vote, that they would stand the best chance of replacing the Republican majority in the Senate. I do believe that's true. So I point out again that it's not that I disagree with the kind of editorial position of MSNBC and CNN that are on that quest. But I am concerned that they have become so ideological in editorializing, and that you don't really get a fair and objective evaluation of the news itself any more than you do on Fox, and I'm troubled by that as a civil libertarian. Now I'm also extremely troubled as a civil libertarian by the things that are going on in the name of this pandemic. And in that sense, it overlaps some with this concern that these people have, these Trumpeteers have, about the Rockefeller Foundation report, et cetera. I am not, and I would hope that none of us are, big fans of a more and more centralized and more powerful central government on the planet. I don't believe that's a good thing. In no small measure, because the Rockefeller Foundation is so much in favor of it. You should know better. You should know better than to support almost anything that the Rockefeller Foundation is supporting. But this movement toward a more and more centralized government presents a very significant danger, I think, on the planet, because it puts into the hands of a small elite cadre more and more power over the entire planet in a coordinated way. And these are the people who are in favor of the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization. All of these institutions are just ardently capitalist. In that they've infused the United Nations with an absolute ideological position in favor of transnational corporate capitalism and international finance, and it's a very dangerous movement, in my opinion. And now, that having been said, I want to address the the issue that's going on now in this regard, this conflict that's going on between the central federal government right now under Trump and the Republican-dominated Senate and the extreme right-wing United States Supreme Court and federal circuit courts and federal district courts that we have now, with over 150 appointments already by Trump of these right-wing Federalist Society judges. And he's moving toward 236 appointments, federal judicial appointments, before we can get him out of there. And this concentration of power in the hands right now of the extreme right-wing dominated Republican Party has poisoned the confidence of the American people, I think the majority of us at least, in the beneficence of the federal government. And so that we find ourselves now, I think we do, I think most everybody here finds ourselves cheering for Andrew Cuomo every morning when he comes on. Everybody turns to Andrew Cuomo and is going, okay, now there's a leader. There's the kind of guy you'd really like to have in charge of the federal government. And with Gavin Newsom bringing up the rear with him. So we got Gavin Newsom in California. Now, I need to tell you that I think I touched upon it 14 days ago when we were talking. I've been writing legal memos, which we've been delivering to Gavin Newsom through specific people. The chief of staff of Gray Davis's administration is delivering these memos to Gavin Newsom, shoring up the authority of the governors to make the decisions with regard to the public health of our people in the state. And that I think we're the first ones that pointed out to both of them, and they've now shared the memos with Andrew Cuomo. That there's a provision in the Constitution of the United States that most people don't pay any attention to, but even in light of the Commerce Clause that grants the authority to the federal government through Congress to regulate interstate commerce. And it's this big famous Commerce Clause in the Constitution. And it empowers explicitly in the Constitution the federal government to coordinate interstate commerce. And anything that any of the individual states try to do that's going to interfere with regulations that the federal government tries to bring to bear on interstate commerce are unconstitutional on the part of those governors, except in Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, there is a provision that says that while the state governments are prohibited from entering into any interstate compacts that would affect the interstate commerce, the governors and the state legislatures are authorized to engage in entering into interstate compacts in the time of imminent danger. And there's virtually no jurisprudence on this particular provision, but we found it and we dug into it. And we have been briefing this to Gavin Newsom and through him to Mario Cuomo, pointing out that they, in fact, are constitutionally authorized to enter into these interstate compacts between each other, specifically in this case, to join together with New York and California and Governor Inslee in Washington State to enter into an agreement not to compete with each other in attempting to purchase ventilators and not to compete with each other when it comes to buying a protective gear for their hospital and first responders. And so that what they did is they muscled up and they just pushed back against Trump and his assertions that he's in charge of all this kind of thing. And they basically told him to piss off, that they realized that they were constitutionally empowered to do this. And Gavin Newsom went so far as to insist that he was going to be conducting the state of California as though it were a nation state. And he reached out to China and actually struck an agreement with them to enter into an international compact to purchase the ventilators and health equipment and stuff from China, and just basically blew right off the federal government. And so that this championing of the primarily Democratic Party governors around the country, to have them defy Trump and tell him that they were empowered to ignore him in a time of imminent danger like this, has really taken seed, and it actually has pushed back Trump now, where Trump, despite the fact that he said, I'm the president of the United States and I have kind of total power to decide what to do here, he's now saying things like he's going to allow the governors to make these decisions, as though he had anything to do about it. He couldn't do anything about it anyhow. But he's saying, I'm going to authorize the governors to make the decision as to when they want to open the places up. And what's happened here is we have actually at the Romero Institute been instrumental in providing the legal briefs that went in to Governor Newsom and Cuomo to actually muscle them up to push back against Trump. Now, I raise all of that with a caveat that we're all hoping that as of November 4th, I guess November 7th this year, we're anticipating that Joe Biden is going to be president of the United States, and we're anticipating that the Democratic Party has a very good chance of ousting McConnell and the Republican leadership from the Senate, so that they would be in control of the federal government. And what I'm concerned about is that all of us are now going to be turning back and starting cheering for the federal government again, and championing the appointment of a replacement for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is as progressive as we can possibly get away with. And we're going to start doing that same thing. And I'm very concerned that what's happening here is the Democratic Party people around the country are becoming extremely short-sighted about principles, that we're rocking back and forth between whether we support the federal government or oppose the federal government, depending upon whether they're Republicans or Democrats. And then the Republicans are doing the same thing. And so that there's a diminution of respect for principle in this whole thing. And so that as long as something can be done to champion our political side of the spectrum, we're for it. And anything that strengthens the other side of the political spectrum, we're against it. And it has nothing to do with principle at all. And as a constitutional lawyer, I'm very troubled by that. I want to be, and I'm certainly not some kind of middle marginalist. I mean, everybody knows that everybody in our institute, from the Christic Institute to our Romero Institute, are progressives, basically Christian social democrats, effectively. But I'm very troubled by this process that's going on now. I think we really need to have a firmly developed understanding of what we believe, for example, the relative powers of the federal government and the state governments. Because remember, I mean, social democrats are not big, ardent states' rights people, as a rule, because the states' rights people have been invoking the power of the states basically to support racial segregation in kind of reactionary policies in the South. That I have found myself here in the last 3 weeks talking to ardent progressives, talking about establishing a confederation of states, a confederation of democratic states, the big blue states, to organize and join into a collective interstate compact to basically defy the federal government, because they happen to disagree with the administration that's there, and they disagree with the policies, and that they're talking about invoking the imminent danger of the pandemic to to draw power away from the federal government into the hands of this confederation of states. And when I was pointing out to them, look, virtually all of the states that you want in this confederation are Democratic Party states. The governor's Democratic, all the state legislatures are Democratic, and you're basically talking about having the Democratic states of the country secede from the federal government because Trump is there. Now look, even as tempting as that may sound, if Trump were to be elected again, the reality is that unless we are effective in getting Joe Biden and ideally Elizabeth Warren, but perhaps Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, getting them, if we're not successful in getting them elected here in November, and Trump wins another 4 years, you're going to start hearing these conversations take place. Because they're going to say, look, if we're the majority of the people and we get a majority of our people by 3 million or as high as 5 million more people to vote for the Democratic candidates, and yet they still can't be seated because of this bizarre constitutional provision of the Electoral College that grants the same kind of, gives power, the people in Kansas, their votes count like twice as much as the votes of people in California or New York, because we only have 2 senators. Both states have 2 senators. And so that you're going to start hearing a lot of talk going on about the democratically controlled blue states joining into a confederation or a set of interstate compacts to basically control our own policies. Now, the most important of all of these policies is going to be global climate change. There's going to be a major movement. If that were to happen, if Trump were to get elected again, you're going to see a major effort on the part of the blue states to organize an interstate compact to take authority, to assert control over the economy of our states collectively, to shut down the oil industry, to shut down the coal mining, to shut down the fracking that's going on. You're going to see that start to happen. And you're going to start to see a replay without people even being conscious of it, of a replay of the early years that preceded the American Civil War. And it's just going to be reversed. But so that I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about that happening. As much as I dislike Donald Trump, as much as I think that he's a basic moral moron and a sociopath, I think that we have to familiarize ourselves with what the constitutional principles are on which our country is founded, what the compromises were that were struck at the very beginning, so that we don't just say, oh, I don't like those principles, let's just get rid of them because I don't happen to like them right now. So I think we've got to start talking among ourselves. If I were teaching the course again, if UCSC were not shut down basically right now, which I think we all have to talk about here sooner or later about what we're going to do about the Trajectory of Justice course, because people found it to be helpful to them. The classes that I taught last spring about the impeachment of Donald Trump, everyone was going, oh, don't say that. You're going to lose your credibility if you say he's really going to get impeached. I said, look, there's no way this guy's not going to be impeached. The question is, what's he going to be impeached for? I said, and so that those of you who participated in the course last year, that that's what we were talking about. So that this topic that I'm raising here tonight would probably be the subject matter of the Trajectory of Justice course at UC Santa Cruz, were we to be doing it this year, because I think we need to hammer down on what these foundational principles of our federal republic really have been. And the reality is that unless there had been an agreement at the very beginning that the colonies that had less population and were more rural and agrarian and had fewer cities, if they weren't given equal representation in the United States Senate, they never would have joined. they never would have joined the Constitution. They wouldn't have supported the Constitution. So we have to try to take into account, what were the compromises that were made at that time, and are we going to stick with them? We're going to stick with them, right? So that's what I'm proposing that we talk about for example, our next session, to really visit this issue and get familiar again with what these fundamental principles were. And we need to remember too. There's a very important thing to remember, and those of you who have attended the classes, you see, know I've talked about this before. Is that right at the very beginning of the Constitutional Convention, there was a fundamental alliance that was established between the Madisonians, who are termed the Jeffersonians, but the Jeffersonians and the Madisonians, they struck a compromise with the supporters of Alexander Hamilton. And Alexander Hamilton was the lawyer that represented the mercantile class, the merchants and the people, the would-be industrialists, the people that wanted to have a new federal government established primarily to coordinate commerce for their benefit. Those who were pushing for the federal republic to replace the Articles of Confederation were those who wanted to have much stronger commercial rules and uniform codes to govern commercial transactions. And so that Alexander Hamilton played an extraordinarily important role in the Constitutional Convention, pushing for fairly conservative positions. He is the one that insisted that the states each have 2 senators. He was the one that insisted there be an electoral college. He's the one that insisted that there not be a direct election of United States senators, and so that we have struggled against that over the years, and the progressives and liberals have pushed back to the point where we actually were able to get the popular election of United States senators, et cetera. But that is something I think we all need to revisit. We can all profit from or benefit from a revisiting of the Constitution itself, and to really try to understand what the principles are, because unless we all do a lot more than we've been doing so far for Bernie Sanders and for Elizabeth Warren, unless we do a lot more than we've done in the past to make sure that Joe Biden and whoever it is he selects as his vice president wins this election in November, we're going to be entering into one of the most critical crises of our constitutional order that we have seen since the American Civil War. And so that it's going to be helpful to all of us to have a refresher course in constitutional law and what the purposes of our federation are really all about, so we can take principled positions to help our country, to help our people, to help the progressive cause. That unless we do a lot more than we did during the primary, that failed to get Bernie the nomination or Elizabeth Warren the nomination, unless we do a lot more than we did and we get our friends and neighbors and family members and people that we went to school with in college or high school, around the country, to get them to do a lot more than they've done so far, we face the very real danger of Donald Trump being elected again. And we're going to face this constitutional crisis, I think. There's going to be such a temptation on the part of anybody with a political IQ above room temperature, to try to organize and mobilize together to form some kind of a confederation of the democratic states in the country to basically push back against the idiocy of a Trump administration. And we've got to do something to undermine his power and his authority. And in doing that, we're fundamentally undermining the power of the federal government, and we're fundamentally undermining the power of the presidency. We're undermining the fundamental power of the two-party system. Now, all of those things may be the right thing to do, but we have to think about it. and we have to be conscious of what the implications are of what it is that we're doing here. Okay, because we've got a situation right now where we've got a profound and fundamental split in the entire perception of reality itself right now. This is a profound danger, in my opinion, and we're seeing it reflected here in the time of this pandemic. That we're seeing an entire portion of our country be completely unconvinced that this is true. And the reality is that we in the progressive community have to share a certain kind of sympathy for some of the people that don't trust the federal government, that don't trust the American Central Intelligence Agency, that don't trust the FBI, that don't trust, and here we find ourselves as progressives, of all things, cheering for the FBI, cheering for the people that are, investigating Trump, cheering for, cheering for the special prosecutor and the FBI, and cheering for Jack Brennan of the CIA. I mean, what's become of us? What a lack of fundamental principle on our part. We know how fundamentally flawed the Central Intelligence Agency is. I've spent hundreds of hours lecturing on how fundamentally malevolent the Central Intelligence Agency is from its very inceptions, from its original memorandum that was written by Robert Lovett, a senior partner in Brown Brothers Harriman, the CEO of which was George Herbert Walker, the attorney for whom was Alan Dulles, writing the original memos proposing the creation of the Central Intelligence Agency. I've read to everybody the Doolittle report that talked about establishing an intelligence unit that was more vicious and vile and would stoop to lower activities than our adversaries in order to beat them. There's no way any of us in our right mind should ever be cheering for anybody from the Central Intelligence Agency, much less the FBI. And yet we've got to try to figure out, what we're going to do, because undoubtedly when Joe Biden gets in, if Joe Biden were to select Elizabeth Warren as his vice president, I think almost everybody here would agree, if they were asked to do so, to go work for Elizabeth Warren in Washington, D.C., to be there and try to establish an existent kind of shadow government there, to be, in the face of Joe Biden every minute, trying to promulgate some kind of a progressive position and prepare Elizabeth Warren for becoming president after the one term of Joe Biden, and trying to roll into place a genuinely progressive, thoroughly competent, and constitutionally educated administration. And so that I want to start getting us tuned up to really appreciate what these principles are, so that we can maintain a position of principle. And though many of the people here may view yourselves as being a little too old to go all the way to Washington, D.C. and serve in the administration, you're still going to be part of a major constituency that is going to be hoping to roll into place. And if it's Kamala Harris, I'm not sure any of us are going to be terribly excited about doing too much to get in behind her to be the next president after Joe Biden. I don't want to knock her because she hasn't even been chosen yet. But so what I'm saying is I'm raising these things because what we may want to do is engage in a homeschooling, a little homeschooling here during the remainder. It's not exactly house arrest, but it's something similar to that. I find myself, I go once every week or so, we go out to the store to get some more supplies to bring home, and I see other people out running around, and I'm tempted to say, what the hell are all these people doing out running around like this? They're all being careless and irresponsible. And then I say to myself, wait a second, are you drinking the Kool-Aid, of becoming part of the law enforcement to keep everybody home when you're such a civil libertarian? So I want to overcome any type of confusion on your part and on my part about what the principles are that are operational here, and take a look at these statistics and find out how we can develop a sound and responsible set of arguments to show that people should take care right now, should protect themselves, should protect their loved ones, should in fact support a central government giving funds to people to cover for them. And in closing, I can see that we've run on to the 8 o'clock. But just let me close with this: that this effort on the part of Donald Trump to brush aside the restrictions that Congress put on $500 billion of the $2 trillion, the $2.2 trillion relief bill that has been passed by Congress. And for him in his signing statement to simply say he's not going to pay any attention to the restrictions that the Congress, both the Republicans and Democrats, put on the distribution of the money to the major corporations is horrendous. It's just frightening what that represents. And I've got to figure out doing some briefs here in the next week to get them to through the same channels that we're getting through to Gavin Newsom and to Andrew Cuomo and Inslee and the others, to mount a major lawsuit against Trump to stop him from being able to effectively enforce his signing agreement, in which he's going to try to plan to give as much of that $500 billion as he can to the same forces that are going to support his reelection. And under Citizens United, they're going to get away with that. So something has to be done to stop that right away. And so I'm probably going to be fairly busy here for the next 10 days or so trying to get that to happen. But I want to thank all of you for letting me bend your ear here for a whole solid hour. But I just want you to realize how important some of these things are to us as supporters of the constitutional order here in our country, because all things said and done, this still is one of the greatest experiments that our human family's ever engaged in on really trying to set up a system that will protect our individual liberties and still be able to have a country that is respectful of everybody else's views, even if they don't agree with us. Okay, so I've run over my time here. I see that.
Thank you, Danny. And next time we should talk ahead of time. If we're going to have a course on getting back to the Constitution, we're also going to consider maybe having a little breakout space where people can wrestle with these. Not a lot of your time, but just time where people can talk to each other. Anyway, we'll talk about that before the next gathering. Okay. Before you do your closing statements, I'd like to encourage everyone to please go to Romero Institute. You can also access Danny and ask him a question directly there, but there's a donate sign, a give sign in the upper right-hand corner, and they are really needing our support. I spoke last time how I'm fasting 1 day a week, so it liberates $40 a month. Do whatever you can, especially monthly donations. And in the spirit of Tatanka's Living Room, those who have a lot, give a lot. Those who have little, give a little. Those that don't have any, don't give any. And it all works out. But really consider giving 20, 30, 50. And I want to thank the people who already have given 50. And, a real generous donor who gave more than 10,000. I mean, we need everybody's support to support the Romero Institute with Danny and Sarah and the incredible staff that is working. So we're also thinking about ways to support the people who become donors and maybe involve a little bit more attention with you. Anyway, we'll share that next time. So, Danny, you have any final comments before we say goodbye?
No. I really appreciate our getting together and the fact that the numbers are going up of the people that are coming on here on Fridays. If you would just get a hold of some of your other friends and bring them on board here, we can really dig in on some things and try to figure out some sort of communication protocols that'll enable us to talk in a kind of a more bilateral way than just me kind of blathering at you for an hour.
bring your friends here and consider donating. And I want to thank all our spirit guides and ancestors for being with us, and thank you for sharing what you're doing, Danny. And let's open it up, and everybody can say thank you, and those who want to stay on for a while can do that. Can you open it up, Carol?
Far out, you guys.
We love you, Danny.
Danny.
Thank you so much. Bless
Bye, you guys.
Hey, Dolores. Good to see you.
Danny.
Hey.
Thank
Hey,
you.
happy birthday, Dolores.
Happy birthday.
Dolores.
Hey, Dolores.
We have Dolores. We're on the line.
Guys.
Just turned 90.
Monica, how are you guys?